Hello, everyone. I hope you are doing well. My name is Harsha, and I would be the moderator for today's exciting event. I would like to thank you all for taking out the time to attend the EdTech Power Hour session hosted by Harbinger. For those who are joining us for the first time, Power Hour is the series of interactive roundtable discussions amongst the industry stalwarts, where they would be sharing their ideas, experience, and insights on a particular topic. So the topic for today's discussion would be the EdTech story moving beyond a sunrise industry. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping tips. In case you cannot hear the audio, ensure you have selected the right speaker for audio output. You may test the same to see if it is working fine from the audio setting option on the lower left corner of your screen. If necessary, dial in using a phone. With that, now it's time for the introduction. For our today's host for the roundtable discussion is Rahul Singh. Rahul is a digital learning enthusiast and is passionate about helping organizations and leaders solve challenges around learner engagement and student outcomes through intervention of learning technologies. In a career span of over 15 years in the digital learning space, he has helped a host of organizations and educational institutions in implementing new initiatives around their digital learning strategy. We welcome you, Rahul, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Harsha, for the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this Power Hour session today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon wherever you are joining in from the world, from the globe. We want this to be an interactive session. Ideally, this is planned for 60-odd minutes. The plan is that, first 45 minutes we'll have a conversation, and the last 15 minutes we'll keep it open for Q&A. But it doesn't mean that we would stop you from asking questions in between. In fact, we would encourage that while we are in the middle of the conversations, please feel free to share your thoughts, ask questions. We want this to be an interactive session as much as possible. And once again, thank you very much for taking the time out for this. We hope you'll enjoy this session and this conversation today. So moving ahead from here, what do we have as a game plan for today? What are we going to look into? The first question that we are going to ask our panelists today is, has EdTech moved beyond the sunrise industry? We'll get their sense on this. The second question would be, when do we expect consolidation to start kicking in? If the EdTech industry is booming and if there's a lot of investment happening, when is the consolidation happening? Has it already started? Is it around the corner, or is it still far away? The third question, which a lot of us in the attendees would be interested to listen into, is what investors want to hear from the EdTech product owners, what they want to actually know about. And we'll try and pick brains of our panelists to understand a few things to watch out in the future. So that's basically our game plan for today. And with that, moving ahead, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our panelists today. So firstly, we have Saar Pikar on the call with us for this Power Hour discussion. Saar, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us.
And Saar, if I may request you to please tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how you are associated with the EdTech industry, just for the audience to know you a little better.
Sure. I spent 18 years working at a company called CDI. Since then, it's now called Twox, and my older brother still runs that company. That company, what it did was provide the underlining technology for schools, K-12 and higher education for the EdTech industry. So devices, internet connection, full IT solutions. I did that for 18 years, left the company, took a year off, and then decided I'm much too young to do nothing. So I joined OMERS Growth Equity, and I spend my time around EdTech, investing in new, exciting, fast growth companies, mostly in North America, but we take a look at all over the world. So been around education now for 21 years.
That's quite a long time, sir. 21 years, probably in the education space. And you said that your first stint with education was when you actually started. At that time, how was it different as compared to today's time? Of course, keeping aside the pandemic that has just triggered everything. But where do you see how far we have come from those initial days to today?
Well, I think some of the work that we did had something to do with it, but I would give you, a number that comes to mind. When I started at CDI, the average computer to student ratio was 8.3 to 1. So there was one computer for 8.3 students. I'm talking North American, mostly US-based numbers. So that kind of gives you everything, right? The number today is almost 1 to 1, and the expectation is it's going to go to 1.6 to 1. So there's going to be 1.6 devices in every school per student. That by itself tells you everything, right? Connectivity, online, digitization, the ability to go from paper to digital. All of that changed significantly. Now, I say that I'm an excitable guy, so I'm excited about that. I'm excited about everything. Having said that, it took 20 years. And, in our home space, our kids went from 0 to 1 devices to 2 to 1 in a span of 24 months. So the answer to your question is everything changed and not much changed at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing this story, Sarah. And that actually reminds me, and very interestingly, the ratio that you mentioned between a computer and a student. So I've done my schooling, the entire schooling in India. And when we used to go to school, there was supposed to be a computer lab, and we would used to go to that lab to, do some stuff, primarily academic stuff. And there would be like, 10 or 12 of us who will get turns and use a computer. And we were supposed to learn some programming language, in those good old days, probably this 20 years back. But what we actually did was we used to play Mario or those computer games. And we used to convince or bribe the other students that, oh, you don't worry too much about it. Let me play and let me also use your airtime on the computer. So, so I just correlated to the fact that when you mentioned the computer to student ratio, so it looks like it was not much different across the globe at that point of time.
It really is. It wasn't. And if you think about it, one thing when you talk about studying in India, where, economic development was lagging the US, and although there is an important point over there, which sometimes when you lag and you don't have things, then you can bypass people that have other things working for them. And which is why I think India right now is the most exciting EdTech universe, where all exciting things are happening. But I'm talking about North America. The idea that kids used to go to school as short as 10 years ago and have no access to a device is quite amazing. There are still kids going to school in first world countries, in North America, absolutely. They don't have internet connection. That is, surprising. I don't know if anybody would accept that in their family life, but we accept that in our K-12 market all the time.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, Sarah. In fact, that's a debatable point in itself in terms of one part is that, the EdTech industry, what it's doing for the students. But the second part of the story is the internet divide, or, the way they call it, the net neutrality. So we'll come back to that probably in our discussion. Once again, thank you very much for taking the time out for joining us for this conversation. Now it's the time for me to welcome our second panelist for the day. We have Michael Spencer on the call with us. Hi, Michael.
Hello, good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael, for taking the time out for this insightful conversation. Michael, the same request I made to Saar. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself, how you're associated with the tech industry?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me on the show today. Born and raised overseas most of my life. Started off born in Africa, lived several countries in the Southeast Asia, Middle East, doing most of my teens in Latin America. Came to the United States in '82, where I graduated from Caltech, did my MBA in Monterey, California. Dove right into working with large computer companies, promoting their technologies through distribution globally. About 5 years into my career, I found myself exploring education. At that time, we had a company where we had designed a portable laptop device that we were promoting predominantly to the government sector. We found a tremendous uptick in use amongst the devices amongst teachers. We found out that at the time, again, as Saar also alluded to earlier, there was a tremendous gap between one-to-one devices in education. we at that time pivoted and targeted education both domestically and aggressively. And again, we're in that space. At the time, computer to student ratio was about 15:1. So the company was quite successful. We had a good successful exit. We then in turn designed a follow-on technology that was a little bit more enhanced, incorporated a variety of education applications, successfully exited off of that. So for the better half of the past, I'd say 15 years, we've been in the EdTech space, pivoting a little bit out of the hardware space to more the software as a service and platform as a service space. Again, distributing technologies globally. So at this point, we're companies called Global Expansion Strategies. And what we do is we help EdTech companies expand globally through distribution channels. We focus on aggressively scaling the companies up, subsequently investing either through ourselves, co-investor, third party, and oftentimes find ourselves setting up the companies for exits.
Thank you, Michael, for that wonderful introduction. I think one of the things that stands out as and very interesting is, you've been in different parts of the world, right, from your childhood days to early education days, and then actually in your, in your career. So that's one interesting, and that's where I think I can connect the dot when you say that, helping EdTech companies expand globally, because kind of been there, done that, seen that. I think that's a couple of interesting points, and we'll definitely kind of like to get some additional insights on that in terms of expanding globally and scaling. Because those are the two key things probably which the EdTech product owners would like to, hear more about and listen about.
Okay, sure.
So once again, thank you very much, Saar and Michael, for taking up for this conversation. And so let's move ahead with our conversation today. And I don't want to bore you with these numbers. We have been seeing these numbers for the last 18 months, 20 months. Everyone is talking about, how the industry, how investment is getting pumped into the industry and all. But I still felt that, just for the sake of setting the context, let's look at a few numbers. Right. So, so primarily, the first one is North America dominated the EdTech market in 2020 and held over 37% share of the global revenue. Initially there were some thoughts that, the North America market was probably not leading. There were some countries in Asia like China, which were kind of leading the investment market, but eventually it came down to that a good chunk of the global revenue, 37% share of the global revenue was in the US, was in the North America region. The other interesting aspect is, the growth that is happening in with companies with a cap of 1 billion plus, that's 3 times. So we can expect 100 plus education technology companies with 1 billion plus market cap by 2025. That's a 3x growth. In the first half of 2021, the US EdTech industry has invested 3.2 billion. And it's like literally going out of the roof right now. So these were some of the things in terms of the growth that is happening. And then I had one data point on the challenge aspect of it. And this is primarily from the skilling space. So in the EdTech, we can say that, it's pre-K-12, K-12, higher ed, and the adult education space or the skilling space. This one is relevant to the skilling space. And of course, it definitely overlaps with the higher ed space as well. The mismatch in employer needs and employee skills is leaving over 7 million jobs unfilled in the US. That's a huge number. So this is the gap. Investment is one part, but what do we do about this gap? How do we fill in this gap? That's one key question that I kind of request industry leaders to talk a little bit about. So we'll keep these numbers in our mind, and as we progress forward in our conversation, we'll come back to them if required. So, so the first question for today to start with is pretty generic one, but still we would like to hear your thoughts on this. Both Saar and Michael, we would like to hear your thoughts on this. So has EdTech moved beyond the sunrise industry?
Saar, after you, sir.
Thank you. Listen, it's tough to argue when the title for the presentation is EdTech moving beyond the sunrise industry. I don't want to be impolite and say we are or we're not. I would say this, I mean, if you think about it, sunrise, day, dusk, nighttime, or sunset, there is no doubt that everything about education is pointing up and to the right. Having said that, as somebody who's been in education at large and EdTech specifically for 20 years, we've been saying that valuations, the ability to make profits and to monetize some really good solutions are coming tomorrow, next quarter, next year for 20 years. So I get stuck between those two positions. Having said all of that, I really believe this is the beginning of the next stage. I think that some of the numbers that you mentioned are showing that. I think that there is tailwinds, both because there are just more people in the world, they live longer and they live complicated lives, and everybody is going online, digitizing, and life is complex. For all of those reasons, education is becoming more and more important. It is the way to monetize your own self-worth and to take your God-given DNA and make it better. And for all of those reasons, I think we're at the beginning of something, not in the middle or the end of something.
Yeah, as well, I think from the education industry perspective, it's divided up into two camps, right? Print and digital. I think up until now, the companies that have been predominantly distributing and administering their curriculum through print means have been quite successful, but with pre-pandemic online education being a very small portion of how a curriculum is administered in education, it now has come to the forefront. So I think what we're going to see is we're not going to necessarily see a tapering off of the print industry, but we're definitely going to see a new trend, and that is in online education. And that's going to have tremendous impacts up and down the education chain, all the way from the companies that design and program or develop the technologies, as well as how it's deployed and used in schools. So not necessarily, I would say we haven't really moved beyond that. I just think it's changed to now where we're going to see a new trend, and that is going to be all focused on online education. Online education, both in core and supplemental, K-12 and higher education, but also how it's used in the schools, how it's deployed in schools, and the different modalities in which it's used in schools.
Thank you very much, Michael and Saar, for sharing your thoughts on that. I think one thing that we heard that was clear in your thoughts is this is beginning of something. So basically, we might have not even seen the tip of the iceberg yet, and it's going to change drastically. And Michael, coming back to your point, thank you for categorizing that digital and print separately, because it will be interesting for some of the major print publishers, who have been, kind of ruling the EdTech domain for kind of a decade or so. What kind of strategy change that they would take? For example, is it there was a talk earlier in terms of, probably 10 years back, 2010, 2011, when some of these major print players started talking about digital first approach. And it continued for a very good period of time, probably 4 or 5 years. They were pretty aggressive on it, but suddenly then it went down. At least what I felt as that, that need for digitization or digital first strategy, that kind of went down. But it seems like, because of this, the pandemic, what it has triggered is people are now again more migrating towards the digital first strategy. So what do you feel about these? Would you agree to this, that, the print players, the major print players, they have to, either they have already pivoted into digital, or they have to very quickly pivot to a digital first mode?
Yeah, look, I think up until now, publishers or curriculum development companies dominated what was used in schools, right? But now, because there's been such a plethora of new technologies, that have come out, schools are using those technologies. So now it's almost as if education institutions are dictating, what is and isn't used in the schools. And as a result of that, these print companies have seen that, and as a result of that, they're pivoting now. Their strategies are a combination of divesting, their huge portfolio of companies that they've had, and reinvesting that now in acquisitions, right? So you're seeing these large companies wanting to keep a foothold, and as such realize that their continued strategy of deploying print media, may not be in their best interest, and that perhaps continuing to offer them, digital curriculum would better serve them. And as such, to try to develop that themselves, perhaps challenging with today's day and age, so everything changing so fast. The better alternative is you let them use their big cash reserves and acquire companies, right? And bring it into a portfolio. And we're seeing a handful of companies in that space right now where they're basically a portfolio of a variety of different online content, both core and supplemental, and in the K-12 and in the higher ed space.
Right, that makes total sense. I think one of the points that you mentioned, there's just so much of technology available, plethora of technology available right there. And in fact, we would like to discuss around that. And this question, Michael, this is for you, is from an investor's perspective, which are the pockets that seem to be more promising? Is it the emerging tech, the point solutions, or is it more around the integrated end-to-end platforms?
Yeah, great question. I would say two key points there is emerging technology and integrated end-to-end. But by the pure virtue of what's happened to the education industry and now the impact of the pandemic, new technologies is what's going to dictate moving forward, right? So emerging technologies are going to make companies really keep focused on continuously enhancing their technologies, either through AR, VR, artificial intelligence. There's a variety of other points that they're bringing into their technology development cycles. I also think that a lot of these education companies can't just think about designing them, developing the technologies and making them available to schools. They have to be grossly involved in not only developing their technology, but actually being involved in how it's used within the school. So being involved in the complete end-to-end solution, or having an end-to-end solution, is gonna better serve those companies.
Glad, Michael, that you brought those 2 points up, AI and AR, VR. They're very interesting. And probably I'll divert this question to Sarah. Basically, Sarah, I wanted to get your sense in terms of, I agree with Michael that, the education system has to get closely involved with the solution providers, and then the solution, whether you're using a VR application or an AI-enabled solution to solve a particular challenge or set of challenges, the educators have to involved in the designing of that solution. But you interact and you deal with so many EdTech companies, EdTech players. In your opinion, is it easy to get the educators involved in the end-to-end solutioning process, or how tough it is, or any experiences, thoughts around that?
First of all, I think it comes down, first of all, how do you define an educator? If by educator you mean a teacher within the K-12 environment or a professor in higher education, then the answer is almost always no, it's not. Those are very structured, unionized environments usually, where people are getting paid to do a specific thing that has been done in a specific way for a very long period of time. Now, I don't want to take anything away from our unionized, hardworking people in K-12 in North America who are doing some amazing things, and by definition, they're getting younger every day by a day. And they've grown up with devices, they've grown up with AI devices, virtual reality devices, and they want to do great things. But those are very structured environments. If you talk about educators, as in anybody who wants to teach somebody something, then yeah, you can get a lot of people to give great advice and be involved in the creation of new solutions. I always say, I can give you my thoughts about it, but what is it that I see day to day when I go to invest in EdTech companies? What are the greatest solutions that I see there? And I have to be honest with you, in K-12 and higher education, there is very limited offering that are at any scale that are using real machine learning, AI, or virtual reality. Very limited. At the end of the day, give you as a personal example, I have two kids, an 11-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son. My 14-year-old son is going to start grade 9 next week, I think. And he goes to a great school in Toronto, great teachers, they're fully motivated. He's not the greatest in math. And I have significant concerns about his ability to do well in grade 9 math. You would think that by now somebody would have found a solution for that. Because when you talk to parents and you say to them, what is your biggest problem with your kids' education? Half of them are going to say math or some kind of a STEM course. But most of them are still going to be taught the same way that grade 9 math was taught 120 years ago. So sorry, I went on 3 different tangents over there. I'll go back to your question. And the basic answer is teachers should be involved, solutions should be available, and I'm not seeing great stuff on that front right now.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for so candidly sharing your experiences. And I think you rightly mentioned, I think, we can correlate to this very easily because we have examples in our homes, in our families. We are seeing and observing and what's happening and how is it affecting. But Michael, coming back to your point, thank you very much. I think it makes sense. Emerging technology and end-to-end platforms, that's what we heard from you. And the educators have to be involved. I think there's no doubt about it and we all agree to it. And I think if any of our solution providers are listening, especially when it comes to AI, which is supposed to make jobs easier or lives easier for these faculties or instructors or teachers, how do we involve them in the decision-making or the solution-making process? That's a very important aspect of it. We cannot box a product and assume that it will solve all the challenges for a teacher or a instructor in a college. So thank you for that. And moving ahead with the next question, and Saar, would request your opinion on this. So lately, I've been reading on web that there have been a spurt of acquisitions that the organizations have been going after, and there has been a kind of a positioning around organizations wanting to say that they're a lifelong learning company or a lifelong learning organization. Primarily, what I'm alluding to is so right from pre-K-12 to schooling to higher ed to getting you placed in the job market or skilling you for a particular skill. So we cover that entire domain. So is this just an aberration or is this a precursor to a bigger movement in the industry?
So the real answer is, I don't know, but I would make one fundamental point, which is the whole point in technology, if you think about it, in education, was to not get a one-size-fits-all for our kids, for our workers, for everybody else. The idea was that technology will allow you, to some degree, get verifiable educational solutions by personalizing both the delivery and the content and the outcomes for somebody. That doesn't lend itself well to an end-to-end solution, and it doesn't lend itself well to a lifelong learning company. The idea that the same company is going to take you from K to grade 1, to grade 12, to higher education, to lifelong education, to reskilling on your workplace, kind of works against that, because unless that platform is a bunch of point solutions that help you in different ways, I would make the point that you don't study the same way before the age of 8 or 9 and after the age of 60. It's a very different process. So my gut is telling me that this is not a precursor to a bigger movement, and the companies that will try to create a conglomerate that takes you from age 6 to age 60 in your learning needs are going to either fail or allow a whole bunch of point solutions to come together in a unique way, which I haven't seen yet. Now, I say that, and I know that a lot of companies that are doing a pretty good job of putting together a bunch of different solutions, Chegg comes to mind, great company doing some great things, will argue with me. They'll tell me, no, we're doing great stuff. And actually, I wouldn't argue with Chegg. I think that they're doing great stuff on that front. So as usual, like all answers when it comes to investing, I'm talking from both sides of my mouth.
Interesting. And thank you very much for that perspective. If anyone in our audience would like to share their experiences or thoughts in terms of the lifelong learning companies, or is it necessary, or how's the positioning happening? Any experiences that you want to share, please feel free to type in your chat. And or if you have any other questions for Michael and Saar, please feel free to type in the chat box.
Rahul, can I jump in with one more point?
Please go ahead, sir.
I would argue today that if you ask me what are the biggest publicly traded, or at least public companies, education companies, that Zoom and TikTok should be there. Right now, Zoom is not an education company, and TikTok definitely shouldn't be an EdTech company, but they are, right? And TikTok, in a funny way, or any one of those social platforms, are teaching people stuff, and maybe the wrong stuff. Every time my daughter gets on whatever, TikTok, I hate it. I don't want her to learn things there, but she does. She learns how to do dances, and she learns things about horses or whatever it is that she's interested in. My point on that is TikTok is becoming a lifelong learning platform because people are going to stick with it for a very long period of time. It's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. I don't like it. So I'm not sure how it relates to your question, but it strikes me that maybe point solution would be a great thing. And I think about the answer Michael gave. I would love to hear his opinion on that.
Yeah, I think lifelong learning. It's just another buzzword in the industry that everybody's jumping on board and claiming to be a lifelong company. It seems to me that that's sort of the going trend. I think for anybody in the education space, you really need to look at the company and are they actually a lifelong learning company, right? Yes, there are some companies that are doing a good job at it. Chegg is one of them, but for the most part, I would say to education institutions, be very careful in selecting companies based on their marketing of a lifelong solution provider, because most of the times they're not. So I would say that over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll know who is and who isn't a lifelong learning company.
Thank you very much. These are very interesting perspectives. And Saar, thank you very much for giving that example of TikTok. Or I would certainly agree that irrespective of the fact that it's not within the education technology, but these are the kind of technology solutions or point-to-point solutions which can actually help us cover this divide for lifelong learning. But a nice, cool shout out to everyone in the Chegg community. You heard it both from Saar and Michael today that you guys are doing a good job. Please keep it up, keep doing the good job. Right, so now, all right, so moving ahead in our conversation, we'll move to the next question. And let's see, what do we have as the next question? Yeah, so, and before asking this question, I understand there cannot be a direct answer to this, but still I wanted to kind of pick your brains on this. If one had to choose as an investor or as a entrepreneur, if one had to choose between going into the skilling domain or thinking about creating a skilling platform or getting into the higher ed domain, which one would you recommend? And Michael, we can go with your thoughts first if it's okay.
I'd be preferenced. It's hard to say because a skilling platform can take place either prior to higher education or after higher education, right? And so I've seen several companies do both. We currently have a company in our portfolio that is a skilling company. They originated out of the higher education space, but recently pivoted to also offer skilling capabilities to high school students, both in their last 2 years of high school, but also high school in the advent that they want to take 1 to 2 years off, which we're seeing an increasing demand in. We're seeing students graduate from high school opting to take 1 to 2 years off, get skilled in a certain trade and go off into the workforce. And so from our perspective, from an investment angle, it's hard to say. Both skilling platforms and higher education, I think, offer unique value propositions to both student bodies, right? So I'm sort of preference to both.
Right. And I was kind of expecting this answer, Michael, and thank you for sharing your thoughts there. One interesting aspect that came out is, which I had never thought about, is skilling platform not necessarily is only after your college or higher education or your school education. It can happen prior to that as well. So thank you very much for pointing that out. And Saar, we would like to know your thoughts on this. And just to add to that, I'll twist the question a little bit for you, is that would the lines, as we move forward, would the lines between skilling platforms and higher education keep blurring? Because the end goal is to, help fulfill the job demands, the economic mobility, and all those things. So thoughts around that.
So I hear everything that Michael says, and it makes a lot of sense. I would say that it breaks my heart that that's even a question, because if you think about higher education should be the biggest skilling platform out there. It's where our kids leave high school and go to get real experience and real skills so they can get a job and take care of their life and provide value as a tax-paying citizen in North America, or wherever it may be. Higher education has lost that ability, right? A lot of the things that we do in higher education right now have absolutely no verifiable outcomes. And even the best universities sometimes are just signaling that these are the best of the best, but they're not giving you real skills. I would answer this question straight up. Skilling platforms would be more interesting for me from an investment point of view. I spent most of my life in K-12. K-12 is a really tough place to invest and make returns. And I always say, take a look behind K-12 higher education, skilling, lifelong learning, early childhood education. Who is the payee? Who is the customer? And is it C, B, or G? Is it consumer, business, or government? Government is the toughest one, right? It's tough to make money and move forward when government is the ultimate payer of your businesses. Businesses are better, and consumers in some ways are the best because the TAM is the biggest and you can do a lot of cool things. So for all of those reasons, I would say, straight up answer to your question, skilling platforms are more interesting, but it shouldn't be like that. And maybe higher education is going to start changing to the point where they give you verifiable outcomes and therefore become a great place for both consumer to invest their time and money and investors to invest in them.
That's a very interesting perspective. I think one key thing that we heard from you, Saar, is the CBG framework, the consumer, business, and government. This is very important. I think the EdTech product owners, they should make a note of it in terms of where we are targeting or what's our target area in where we could kind of, and all these three different segments have their own way of operating. And so government, we understand that's the toughest area to make money. But if we were to ask you that, between consumer and business, is there a preference, or can they go hand in hand?
That's a great question. The last two investments we made in EdTech, one of it is a consumer-facing company called Skillshare. It's fully consumer. They're doing great stuff on that front. We love the investment. We made it. Love the management. Love the company. The second one was Exec Online, which is a B2B. And they do great stuff there, although they bring higher education into the equation as well. I think you can find great opportunities in both. I also think you can find great opportunities in government-sponsored businesses. In K-12, I should, full disclosure, I've done very well working within that environment. But I'll give you an example about the government side of it. When we take a look at software companies going into K-12, we usually define the TAM as the number of students times $20 to $100. Now, the spend in the US on a student is around $14,000. So we put that together. So you have $14,000 spent on a student. Some people say $10,000. It depends on the way you define it. But then you go, so where is that money being spent? Well, there's about $50 that goes to all hardware solutions and about $20 that goes to all software solutions. Start thinking about that. That's a ridiculously low amount of the TAM that's spent on EdTech solutions. So my gut is that in the long run, the government spend is going to start shifting into verifiable outcomes and individual outcomes, and technology does that, so it's going to increase that. So as usual, I went on a tangent over here. The answer to your question between a consumer or business, I love both of them. I think you can do great. Government, I think it's starting to shift. I think it will shift even more. And I think that you will find opportunities there because there's less competition there when it comes to investors.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Saar, for sharing that. We do have a question from our audience, and Michael, this question is for you, and probably this question came when you were talking about the digital divide. So read out the question for you. Are these EdTech companies equipped to address the digital divide while trying to penetrate the emerging markets?
It's interesting. We run into that quite a bit. I would say the companies are equipped to address them. However, what they don't know is what happens at the end customer, right? Everything can change. So I would say from a resource perspective, a knowledge perspective, yes, these companies are prepared to address that digital divide, but need to be prepared for some uncertainties at the school when you do decide to take those technologies there.
Thank you, Michael, for answering that question. Right, so moving ahead in our conversation today, this one is my favorite. Online program management. I mean, it's not that, they've come overnight. They have been there, an organization like Wisewire, they have been doing for quite some time, for many years. But, in the recent context of things, they've taken kind of a center stage, if I may say. So my question is, can online program management players, OPM players, benefit both universities and non-traditional working adult students? And when I say non-traditional working adult students, I would primarily refer to, let's say, employees at Walmart. So if Walmart decides today to train their 10,000 odd employees in a particular way, and they tie up with an online program management player, and they kind of send them back to the school or college to get that certification done or training done. So coming back to the core question, can OPM players benefit both universities and non-traditional working adult students? Saar, if you want to take a shot at it.
Sure. So I think if you went to the CEO, founder of Noodle, or to you and asked them, is there anything you can help Walmart with when it comes to their 3 million employees and upskilling them? I think both of them would tell you, absolutely. We can do everything we do for a university, and we should, when it comes to upskilling those skills. So yeah, absolutely. The answer to this one is the easiest one from the questions you've asked us so far. I think the answer is absolutely yes. Are they doing it? No, I don't think. So when you define the TAM for Noodle, I don't think you're defining upskilling people at Walmart. Should you? Yeah. It's the kind of question that provides opportunities within it. It's an interesting question.
Right. I think if we can relay this message to some of our OPM players, there's a lot that we can pick up in the market. I think there's a lot that can be done. Michael, your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's benefits on both, right? From my perspective, I've written several articles on the intersection where, academics meet economics, right? That intersection has become increasingly visible amongst all players in the space these days. So I would say the OPM space has had quite a bit of impact. We're actually working with a customer in that university in that space right now, and they are now looking to target the non-traditional working adults. So I would say from that perspective, yeah, has the model proven to be one where they're starting to see scale and retention? Yet to be determined.
Thank you, Michael. I think I like that phrase that you used, academics meets economics, because at the end of the day, I think, yes, there's a social cause wherein we want to get everyone educated, get them placed, get them, have them have a good life and, get good education for their kids, cater to their family. But the underlying fact is always, there's the economics involved in it. Mm-hmm. Now, coming back to that particular question, let's say, if it's the Volkswagens or the Walmarts or the Targets of the world who have huge employee base, and their bottom line or top line, whatever we may pick, depends upon these frontline workers or these frontline staffs who are dealing with their customers day in, day out. And there has been the traditional learning and development divisions in these kind of organizations who try to, fill in the skill gaps, get them trained, or, get them done things. But lately we have been seeing a little bit of shift, and that's my observation, but I would like to get your expert opinion on it. For example, Walmart still will continue to invest in their internal L&D department. They'll put aside a budget for their internal L&D. However, at the same time, they acknowledge the fact that just alone the L&D cannot solve this entire, maze of challenge for them. So they want external help. So that's why they're sending their 10,000, 20,000 or 50,000 employees through Guild Education or someone else, or like a Penn Foster, and go and do this education, which Walmart will pay the cost, because eventually this is an investment for Walmart in their business, and they are going to get, the economics will play out for when these employees are better trained and come out of it. So is this fair to say, and is this not going only to be with, one or two major players like Walmart's or, some of these other players, but is this going to become more of a reality, more of a need? And does L&D has a challenge from these outside providers or outside players? I hope that's not kind of I have not kind of stirred the can of worms by asking that question, but yeah, please go ahead, sir. Go ahead with your thoughts.
It feels like this is a setup question. It isn't. We haven't discussed. It's a setup question for me to give an advertisement and a commercial for Exec Online, which again, one of our investments, but it isn't. I think that Guild and Ben Foster are doing great work. I think Exec Online is doing great work. It's literally the reason why they exist, right? It's leadership and development within big organization, has been done in a traditional way by bringing people into a classroom, showing them a presentation, hoping that they retain something and sending them back to the front line to lead and develop other people. That doesn't work. We know that it doesn't work because we have tests that show us that even the most simple things, that legislative things about sexual harassment or security and safety in the workplace is not being absorbed by the employees. So again, the need is obvious. I think at some point, I think you mentioned at the beginning that there are 7 million unfulfilled jobs. You can fulfill them by bringing people from the outside, or you can teach your frontline employees to fulfill those more complicated jobs that you need. And within that, give them an ability to improve and to move forward in their job and have a lifelong commitment to your company and from your company to them. Amazon is doing some good stuff on that front. Walmart is doing some good stuff on that. McDonald's, which is really an entry-level position, has been doing a good job on that front for many, many years, not by teaching people internally, but by paying a little bit to help them to go to university. So I think companies like Exec Online, which are so socially motivated to do the right thing, so do well while doing good and do good while doing well, there's going to be a lot more of those companies. I think the need is unbelievable, right? And anybody who started a new job and try to absorb what it is that they need to do that job, and then to move forward in that job and try to get the learning within their company knows, oh my God, there can be a better solution for this. And it shouldn't involve sending your employees somewhere else. They should be able to do it from their home, from their office, and they should be using an OPM-like solution to do that.
That's wonderful, Saar. So I think someone like an internal L&D and someone like an Exec Online, they'll complement each other, because the internal L&D will have to be there. But I think it's what we heard is if everything was getting solved or all the challenges were getting solved, then companies like Exec Online or Penn Foster might not be required or not exist. So we heard you. I think that's a very important aspect. And things like this, like leadership development or the soft skills. There's been so much talk about in the coming the future workforce or the future workplace. The technical skills, of course, they are required, but there's so much more demand for these soft skills. Leadership is one huge, big gap area where companies are struggling to get their next line of leaders established. Michael, would you disagree, agree, or?
Listen, I agree. I think, these organizations with their internal L&Ds have tremendous impact to, keeping their existing employees happy, but also keeping the employees, right? I mean, it comes back to, that intersection of that economics where economics meet academics, right? If you can keep these employees for a little bit longer, or perhaps ongoing, it's less of an economic impact to the company. I state, for example, as Saar did earlier with McDonald's, Starbucks. My day doesn't start off without a Starbucks. And as I go to these Starbucks, wherever I am throughout the world, I always talk with them and inquire, what's the number one reason why you stay there? This is the barista or anybody behind the counter. And they tell me it's not so much the pay as it is the programs that are available from Starbucks to their employees to improve themselves in any variety of capacities. And so I think that in that perspective, I'm an advocate for it. I definitely see there's a need for it. And if you're looking at employees where they're jumping from job to job just to make an additional $1 to $2 an hour extra, a nominal investment on behalf of these organizations is going to keep that individual for much longer.
Thank you very much for sharing that thought, Michael. And if you don't mind, I'll keep this phrase with me for a long time: academics, not economics. Thank you very much for sharing that. It's 3 words, but pretty impactful.
Yep.
Okay. Right. So this is one question we wanted to ask you in terms of you manage investment portfolios, you lead companies in this particular. So if there were a few, suggestions or insights that you wanted to give to EdTech product owners in terms of what you want to hear from them or what investors want to hear from them, if you could please share some thoughts around that. And Michael, if I may request you to please go ahead and share your thoughts first.
Yeah, without having to dive into the details, sure, look at the top line, look at the bottom line, make sure the model is sound. But I think it's really important for companies that are developing top products these days that they have ability to scale, but also retain that scale. And I say that because allowing you to do so provides a tremendous, it leaves resource intensive needs for capital down the road. So if you have a product that can scale and retain its scale over a year, a variety of other things impact that model, specifically the cost of acquisition, right? So when you take a product to market, for companies that have a one-off, your cost of acquisition is going to continuously trail your bottom line, where you're going to have to continuously spend to acquire those customers. But if you have a product that it's embedded in a school, large school operator, and it has that scale and retention, cost of acquisition may be high in year 1, but years 2, 3, 4, it's not, right? So I think product owners have to look at the business side of their models. Again, we're back to the intersection of where academics meet economics, right? A lot of these companies are great academians. They have great backgrounds, and have a solution that can, get into the market, generate a couple $1 million in scale in revenue, but they do have to look at the business side of it in order to be able to maintain that business model and stay current with trends, right? So I would always advocate, make sure that you look at the overall picture, right? Not only the product side of the product side, but also, the business side. From the business side, I would say that has to be with a focus on online education, right? The going model moving forward, we advise all of our EdTech companies, develop your technology so that it can be implemented in a fully virtual environment, not for brick and mortar school. With the changing dynamics of what's happening in education, we thought perhaps a couple months ago that schools were going to be going back in session. But we now see that there are several countries throughout Southeast Asia, Latin America, even the Middle East, that ministries of education dictated, nope, for the next 6 months, we're all going virtual. Right. So I would encourage companies to design their technologies so that they can be deployed in fully virtual environments, and then perhaps configured to be deployed in blended learning models. It's a lot easier to go from virtual to blended learning, i.e. sprinkling in class sessions as opposed to the other way around. We've seen it the past year, where the transition from in-class instruction to fully virtual has been challenging, right? Been very challenging. I myself, with a 16-year-old and a 16-year-old boy, 14-year-old girl, boy, just like you, Saar, challenged with math. My girl, not so much. They just started school this week, and I have to tell you, I am grossly concerned with how far behind they are. I think if their school were deployed or fully virtual, the transition back to school would have been a lot easier. So, without going off on a tangent, I would say there's a multitude of things, but I would say probably the most important is for product owners to really make sure that the technologies can be deployed in blended learning models or fully virtual models. And it goes back to one of the components, what's key, end-to-end solutions, right? You have to think about not only how your solution is going to help achieve student outcomes, but how's it going to be actually used in the classroom to achieve those student outcomes, be it fully virtual, fully in class, or a combination of two, which is blended.
Thank you, Michael. I think you underlined the statement in terms of the message is loud and clear. The product should be designed to go fully virtual as required, and at times come back to a blended mode. So that should be the key consideration. And thank you very much for sharing that, Michael. Saar, your take on this?
I would just start by saying that I think Michael's answer was spot on. I mean, there were so many things over there. First of all, about scale, and as far as blended and online and the ability to deploy your solutions in all of those environments. Dead on. Actually, it's so dead on that I almost think of it as, well, obviously, but it's not. And many companies miss that. So that's a really good point. We always look for verifiable real-world educational outcomes. And it is surprising how many EdTech companies have EdTech, but they're not producing any outcome that you can verify in any way, or move you forward in any way, or give you any advantages in any way. So that's the first thing. The second thing is deep commitment to doing good. And that's not just because we're good people and OMERS is a good organization. We are, and it is. But it's because in education, doing anything but good is going to be really bad business. So that's the second thing that I always look for. And then the third thing, I'm going back to something that Michael already brought up, which is go to market and scale. So many EdTech companies are run by people who really care about education, God bless them, but it's a business and you need to be able to sell that business. So we look for it. Can you get to market? Can you get to scale? We're a growth investor. So usually by the time we get involved, you're starting to prove that if you haven't proved that already. And I would say one small thing on that, the ability to creatively define, redefine, and continuously redefine your TAM is crucially important in education, because what your TAM today might be very different a year or 2 years or 3 years tomorrow as you think about your product. And then I would say one last thing, which is we would love to see it, but we don't see enough of it, is can you make education fun? Because if you read about pedagogy in general, the number one thing that changes the way people learn is, do they want to actually learn that? Are they enjoying it? So both Michael's and my problems with our sons when it comes to math probably comes down to the fact that they hate it. They don't want to do it. If they want it, we don't have any problems. I'm guessing, Michael, I'm guessing here, but since he's 16 and mine is 14, you have no problem putting him in front of a computer game. They learn that, no problem, right?
Yes, they do.
So make it fun. And to make it fun, I think you can use VR, AI, ML, and obviously gamification. Gamification should be used all the time. And I'm seeing so little when it comes to that. I would love to see a lot more. And if we do and they can get to scale and they're doing good, we'll invest in them because that'd be great.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. I think the one key point that I'll pick out of your suggestions is the verifiable educational outcome. If you're not able to deliver that, then it's a question mark, it's a challenge. And all the other advice that you gave, that's like really spot on. And it's very crucial for the EdTech product owners to rally around that. Making education fun. And thank you very much for bringing out the part about gamification, because prior to this conversation, there was a discussion that was happening in the group, and our focus was when it came to emerging tech, we said AI, AI, ML, VR, AR. There was even blockchain and robotics that we touched. And when it came to gamification, we kind of left it aside. But thank you very much. After hearing from you, it seems like yes. And since you're experiencing this at a personal level as well, so that makes it more verifiable. So gamification, that's one keyword that we heard here. So with that, I think we are coming to the end of our conversation. I will request the audience to please go ahead and start typing in your questions if you have any in the chat box or Q&A. I would like to, before handing it over to Harsha, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you, Saar and Michael, very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Really appreciate. We totally understand how precious your time is. You might be listening to pitches from other EdTech companies rather than staying here for us. But thank you. This advice is very valuable for all the audience who have been listening in to us. And Saar, Michael, please feel free to type in your email IDs in the chat box, because if the attendees would like to reach out to you, they can, reach out to you if they have any specific questions they can ask to you. With that, Harsha, over to you. Sorry, we have run a few minutes. We have run by a few minutes, but this is such an interesting topic. We could go on for like hours on talking on this. So over to you.
Thank you, Rahul. Absolutely. While you said that about the questions, type in questions, we just got a question for the panelists. If anyone can take it ahead before I go ahead with takeaways and concluding thing. So this is related to the last question we were on about the investment on EdTech companies. So there is a question on how investing in EdTech startups can combine profit with purpose. So if anyone of you can take it up, we'll be grateful.
Yeah. Breaking it down to be simple, purpose has got to be defined by outcome, right? If you can develop a technology that achieves the optimum outcomes for whatever the intended audience, grade level, or subject is, I think you have to think it from the purpose of going backwards. Design the technology. If it achieves the student outcomes, the profits will be there, right? Not the other way, right? We've seen so many times before where companies design technologies and they wrap a tremendous amount of resources and marketing and advertising around it. And the buyer, oftentimes a district or school teacher, gets overwhelmed by the marketing, buys into it, buys it, and never uses it. I'm sure, Saar, you've probably seen as well as myself in the past, tremendous buy-in from both software, sometimes even hardware. And they sit in the school and they're never used. They sit on boxes for months, inside boxes, i.e. laptops or tablets or software. So you need to work from it backwards. Find out what is going to be the optimum outcome for those students. And then obviously just design your model accordingly.
I would just jump in and say completely agree with that. I'm a market economy capitalist through and through, and I don't think it has anything that is mutually exclusive from education. You can get you will get great education outcomes and get people to vote with money. I think money is a great direction or a director of resources. I think when we forget that, we do bad things. I think that great EdTech companies should be very profitable, should create shareholders returns and create great things. So the whole idea of doing good while doing well, that is the way we think about investing in EdTech. And we don't do investment in EdTech as a not-for-profit idea or because it's socially responsible. That is an obvious, but the way to find out if you're doing the right thing is by creating profits and shareholders value.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for answering it so beautifully. I'll just move on to the concluding part. Just to state the quick takeaways, state of EdTech industry, things to consider while pitching to investors and things to watch out for in the near future. I'll quickly move towards a quick concluding part for our today's panel session. To quickly talk about Harbinger Group. Harbinger Group is a global provider of software product and services established in the year 1990. So it's been 30 years we are in business. We have been serving clients from across the globe, right from North America, Europe, UK, Asia Pacific, and the Middle East. Overall, as an organization, we are more than 800 employees, individuals spread across India and US. And at the group level, to bifurcate the scenarios, we are 3 companies: Harbinger Systems, wherein we provide engineering services, focuses on HR tech, health tech, and EdTech domains. Then we have Harbinger Knowledge Products, wherein we have products for those teaching and learning development professionals, to name a few. Raptivity, which is a rapid interactivity authoring tool. Quillians, that's an AI-enabled assessment generation tool. Then we have Harbinger Interactive Learning, which is the custom content development arm of Harbinger Group, focuses on e-learning development, content transformation, modernization services. So this is in a nutshell about Harbinger Group. If you would like to have more information and any questions, please feel free to drop us a line. We have shared the email IDs of our panelists as well. So, we'll be sharing more information. Please feel free to chat and share your questions. With that, I would like to thank you, Rahul, and our panelists for the wonderful discussion. And I'm sure we all are going with some food for thought today. At least I got some different information that I didn't had earlier. So thank you so much. And I would also like to thank our viewers and attendees who are joining this session through Zoom as well as LinkedIn. And you have been amazing today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Harsha. Rahul, pleasure. Thank you for having me again. Saar, been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.